What's up, booktube? It's Leah Cooper, and today I'm bringing you my May reading wrap-up. So I was really hoping I would be able to squeeze in one more book this month, but it's the last day of the month. How is it the last day of the month already? I don't know, but it is, and I'm only halfway through the book I'm reading, so I've just had to come to terms with the fact that I'm not going to finish it until next month. That being said, the first 2 weeks in May, man, they were really good reading weeks. I was averaging 100 plus pages per day, which for me is very good. The last 2 weeks of the month were more just average. I managed to read 7 books though, which is pretty good, and I read 2,467 pages, so that averaged out to be 80 pages per day for the entire month, more or less. I read 5 books off of my owned physical TBR, 1 audiobook, and 1 ebook from the library. That's also really good. I read 2 things off of my 20 books to read in 2020 challenge, and that is awesome because I'm a little bit behind on that project. The Historian, because of how long it took me to read that book, really put me behind on that project. So I was like looking at that 20 to read in 2020 list earlier in the month, and I realized that I'm pretty much going to have to average 2 books off that list every month until the end of the year if I actually want to finish everything on that list. Realistically, there's a couple of very, very long books on that TBR, like Jonathan Strange, that might just not get read this year, but I'm going to try. I'll talk about that more in my TBR. But the fact that I got 2 books knocked off this month, I'm feeling really great about. So obviously at the beginning of the month, I had a Twitter Friends Picks My TBR video. There were 9 books from 9 numerical prompts people submitted. I read 4 out of the 9, and I am currently halfway through a 5th off that list. I was really hoping to do a little bit better. I definitely wanted to get like the thing I'm currently reading and 1 more book off that TBR read. Like, I knew realistically I couldn't read all 9, but I was hoping to do a little bit better, but I still managed to tackle about half, and a couple of the things off that list I definitely would not have picked up just like on my own, like on a whim. So for that, I'm like really grateful for the challenge. But anyways, enough kind of recapping. Let's just talk about the books I read. So the first thing I read was actually a carryover from April. So that is Brightness Falls from the Air by James Tiptree Jr. And let me tell you something. It feels like a year since I read this, because dang, May was a busy, not even busy, stressful, anxiety-inducing month. Like, it has not been necessarily a fun time. It feels like I read this a really long time ago. But anyways, so I had this on my April TBR for my Classic Women's SFF Readathon TBR. This was the book I was going to read from the 80s. And I did read, I started it in April, but then I set it aside to read stuff for BookTube SFF, and I didn't get back to it until the end of April. Finished in early May. I think I gave this 3.5 stars. Let me double check that on my spreadsheet real fast. This is the first and only James Tiptree Jr. I have read. Oh, I actually gave this 4 stars. That's interesting. I don't know if I'd give it 4 stars, or maybe like 3.75. So James Tiptree Jr. is not unproblematic, and I do want to acknowledge that. But she's also a very important figure in mid-20th century science fiction when it comes to women in science fiction. So I wanted to read something from her. Looking at the Goodreads reviews, this might not have been the best place to start, but it was fine. It is about a distant planet. There are some human space organization caretakers. There's a massive star nova wave traveling through space that's going to pass through the atmosphere of this planet. It's supposed to be this spectacular kind of cosmic phenomenon, and there are some tourists who have arrived to witness it, and it turns into kind of this closed circle, isolated house mystery thing. And I kind of really like it for those reasons. Like, it blurred lines there with science fiction and pulling from, like, kind of closed circle mystery type stuff. And it was just, like, kind of like a great action piece. And yeah, there is some really disturbing stuff in here that's very weird and dated. There's some of the tourists are literally porn stars. They're a troupe of porn stars, but they're also reality television stars, but like they film and release two versions of everything they film. There's like the reality TV version and then there's the porn version, and they're there to film porn under the light of the stars. But they're also very underage. They're like 15 or 16 and they've been doing this for a long time. So it's got which is like a view of how we'll be dealing with kids on grimy what was I can't remember what they called the place that they're from. Whatever place Grid World. They're from Grid World. So that was really disturbing. There's also another kid, Prince Pow, who's like 11, but he comes from the society where they don't let children be with other children. They only have children to be with adults. So he's like an adult, but he's also 11. It's a little weird. So there's some strange things in here that I think would ruffle. They do ruffle modern sensibilities, but I just kind of liked the plot a lot. So I think that's why I gave it 4 stars. I'd probably bump it down to like a 3.75. But overall, I really did kind of like this. It was kind of a fun, isolated action, murder mystery, save the planet kind of stuff. I think for my next tip tree, if I do read anything more from her, I might try her short fiction, because I have heard that that's where she excels. It's with her short fiction. After that, I read Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. This was on my 20 books to read in 2020 list, and it was one of the books that the Twitter number generator, the Twitter friends pick, my TBR, this was picked. I really like this. This was the last Austen I needed to read in my rereading Austen as an adult project, which I've been working on since, I think, 2017. Yeah, it was the first year I had my booktube channel. I was working on this project. Finally finished it. I was concerned. I've been a little bit dreading this one. I won't lie. Not because I don't like the story of Sensibility. I do actually really love it. It's one of my favorites. It was just that I read this as a kid, probably in like junior high, 5th, 6th grade maybe, and I remember it being like I liked it, but I also found it very slow and difficult to get through. And I don't entirely know why, because I think this is not the hardest one to get through. Mansfield Park is the hardest one to get through. Mansfield Park was a slog for me to read, and I will say that I don't like Mansfield Park. This is really good, and I think rereading this as an adult, I appreciate the Emma Thompson screenplay even more than I already did. I love her adaptation of this book into a movie. Love it. And rereading this just confirmed how much I love it even more, because her adaptation is so perfectly flawless. There's like nothing in here. I remembered there being like more differences between this and the movie than there actually are. So obviously my memory is wrong. Her adaptation is so faithful, and I think the thing that she does so brilliantly is she condenses what is a fairly hefty novel. This is a mass market paperback with very small print that's very close together, and it's 340 pages. She condenses this down so beautifully without losing anything, like without losing any of the principal plot or scenes or characters or, you know, plot threads or anything. And so fundamentally just you should read the book, but then go watch the movie, and then when you're like aching for Sense and Sensibility, go watch the movie, because it's only 2 hours instead of 340 pages, I guess. I don't know, it's one of those adaptations that is so good. It's an example of just like such a brilliant adaptation. So yeah, I read this. And then after that, I think I finished In the Skin of a Lion by Michael Ondaatje. This was another Twitter Picks My TBR book. This is I guess a precursor to The English Patient in that it does have it has at least one character crossover. It's about early 1920s Toronto, and it's a bunch of vignettes. It's not short stories, it's vignettes. Mostly about a character named Patrick Lewis, who's from, I think, the wilds of maybe like Alberta. He's from the backwoods, and he comes to the city. He works various jobs. He becomes integrated into various like kind of immigrant communities, and we see basically how Toronto is built on the back of immigrants. And I think that's really kind of the thrust of the book. I found the first third kind of dull because it's a very typical literary fiction man in love with like this first woman he meets, basically, and then she leaves him for another man, and then he falls in love with her friend years later, but he doesn't like know any of them. They're not real people, they're just cardboard cutouts. But then it shifts into a very like kind of pro-communist, pro-socialist, proletariat discourse about who owns stuff, and also like how capitalists like capitalist empires are built on the backs of the workers who get nothing, who get shit, and who die for it. But then it like at the end he's like, he really goes into this like revenge proletariat thing, but then the character totally like wimps out on his grand mission at the end, and I found it extremely unsatisfying, and I couldn't decide what the author was trying to say by that. Like, I really couldn't, because like up until then it had seemed very critical of capitalism, but then it really seemed to soften the message, and so I didn't like that. Obviously there's a bunch in this book that's going over my head. It is literary fiction. I'm sure it's got tons of allusions and stuff that I just didn't get. But yeah, ultimately I was disappointed in it. I think I gave it 3 stars. Let me double check my spreadsheet. Yes, I gave it 3 stars, and I would stand by that. I do plan on reading The English Patient at some point. We'll see how I get along with that. After that, I finished an audiobook I was listening to, which was Prudence by Gail Carriger. This is the first book in the Custard Protocol series, which is her 3rd series if we're talking chronological, and it follows the characters of Prudence and I can't remember her name. They're the children of the protagonists from the Parasol Protectorate. I've completely forgotten their names. Damn it. But anyways, I just remember Prudence, Prue, and I can't remember her name. It's totally gone out of my head. This was a lot of fun. Her daughter was adopted by Akladama the vampire to keep her safe, and mostly raised by him, and he gives her an airship and a mission to go to India for what she thinks is to negotiate new tea trade agreements, and nothing is as it seems. Everything spirals wildly out of control. She recruits the help of Madam, oh gosh, I can't think of her name, Madam, the Hatter. What was her name? The Hatter and the Inventor from the Parasol Protectorate. Madame LeFou. She recruits Madame LeFou's sort of son. He's not technically her biological son, but she adopted him. She recruits him. He's like one of her engineers. She recruits the twins from her mother's best friend, her 2 kids that Prue grew up with. I can't think of either of their names. And they're all on this airship, on this wild adventure. I don't necessarily think it's the most nuanced take on imperialism, because this is like Victorian London, Victorian England, controlling the world. Sun never sets in the empire. They do go to India for stuff and have most of their adventures in India, dealing with people of color from other countries, not just India, there's some others. And I don't think Gail Carriger is always the most nuanced or sensitive author when it comes to these topics. And I acknowledge that. And I don't always like how she sort of tries to address some of that stuff, but sometimes it just comes across as flippant. And it does, because her books are at their core very flippant themselves. They are comedies. They are, fantasy of manners, comedies in the same kind of vein as like maybe an Oscar Wilde type thing, but with vampires and werewolves and stuff. And so so that caveat with these books. I didn't love this as much as the Finishing School series. The Finishing School series so far is still my favorite. But this was good, and I do think that this was better than the original series. The original series definitely leaned too hard into the sexiness, ooey gooey love romance, paranormal romance kind of tropes, I think. And I prefer Gail Carriger embracing more of like her comedy chops and like friendship stories, because I think she's better at them. I did give this, I think, a 4 stars. I have the second book on my shelf back here. Definitely going to read it sometime in the future. After that, I did read an ebook, and that was The 10,000 Doors of January by Alexi Harrow. Read this for the BookTube SFF Awards. I think it was nominated in the debut category. Right? Yeah. Debut category. It's a fantasy novel. I think it's YA. Like, it's a Bill's Roman. It's a coming of age story, and she's definitely still a young adult at the end of the book, so I would categorize it as a YA, and in the way it was written. It's a light, well, no, it's a pretty decent, it's like a multi-worlds fantasy story about a girl. Her father works as like an artifacts procurer for a rich American, and this is like 1860s, 1880s. Is it after the Civil War? I think it's after the Civil War, so maybe like 1880s. And she lives with their rich benefactor, right, as his ward, while her father does all this work traveling all over the country. And she has a pretty terrible childhood. She's a person of color. Her mother is dead. And she's kind of at the mercy of this rich white benefactor. And she discovers a book called The 10,000 Doors. And she starts reading it. And it talks about, it's written from the perspective, it's written kind of like a scientific exploration journal about someone who found doors into other worlds. Yeah, I don't really want to say anything too much more than that, because I think it'd be really spoilery, and this is like a new release, so I'll be mindful of the spoilers. I think I gave this like a 3.5 stars. Well, I gave it a 4 stars. Interesting. Parts of it I liked. Parts of it I found very anxiety inducing. I almost DNF'd it about 30 or 40% in, because it hit this one kind of plot thread that I struggle to read. I really can't. It really makes me uncomfortable. I had to go on Twitter and ask people if it was a plot thread that lasted very long, because I wasn't doing well with it. Luckily, it didn't last much longer from where I was at that point, so I pushed through and I read the rest of it. And I think quite a lot of the action pieces are really good. I think the story in the book that she finds is very good. I like how that ties into everything else. I just didn't like how the author handled all of the climax portions. There's this part where there is another woman who was hired by her father to kind of look after her and help raise her while he was gone, and that woman, we find out, came through a door, and that door was destroyed, and now she can't go back to where she comes from. And I'm just gonna have to say spoilers for the 10,000 Doors of January, because I have to express my frustration here. So then our protagonist, January, discovers that so this woman, I can't remember her name, her companion asks her to, when she discovers that she can like open doors, she asks her to come back to Nigeria with her and open her door back to her world. And January is like, well, I can open a door within our world, but I think it'd be too costly if I opened a door to another world. Doesn't even try to do it, even though this woman has risked a fuck ton for her and tried to keep her safe and protect her and fought for her up until this point and been her only like companion in the house that she grew up in. And then they go through a door into another world. That door just gets destroyed, and so they're like trapped on that world. And then so in desperation, January tries to open the door back to their world, and oh look, it worked. But then instead of taking her companion and friend back to Nigeria and opening her fucking door for her, she writes a letter and says, I gotta go find my dad, and runs off. And I think that's so selfish and shitty. So, like, it made me so irritated at January that was what she did. She could have been like, yes, let's go open your door, and then I will go find my father. Because, like, her father was gone. He was gone through a door. There was nothing she could do. She needed to travel to another door to open it to get back to where he was and where she hoped her mother was. And they weren't going anywhere. She could have helped her friend first, but she was a selfish fuck who prioritized her own desires. And I don't like it. And it really soured me on the character. Like, it wasn't even a thought she had. And it really soured me on the character. And she really screwed that woman over, even though that woman was trapped there because January's own father had fucked up and got her door blown up. Whole rant. Really irritated me. There was a couple of other things that just bugged me. January was not my favorite character in the world, so I think I would probably knock it down to like a 3.75, because now that I'm talking about it again, I am still really irked about that. Like those plot choices. And there was a couple others at the end. So anyways, I did read that. I didn't get to anything else in the debut category. I'm not really surprised. I do have a copy of A Memory Called Empire. I was going to listen to it on audiobook like a month or two ago. I could not listen to the audiobook. There was so many proper nouns. The culture was so complicated. It was way too confusing for me to listen to it. So I did check out the ebook copy, but I have not gotten around to reading it. And I don't know if I'm going to at this point. I have other things I want to be reading in June. And really, May is the end for reading for the BookTube SFF Awards. So, yeah, I'm probably just not going to get around to it. My hold on Gideon the Ninth still has not come in at my library. So, because, again, I'm stuck waiting for ebooks because the physical library is closed. So, yeah, I'm just not going to get to the debut category. But I did read that one, which ironically was the one I was not the most excited to read. But it was okay. Like, the writing was fine. The writing itself was fine, and I would not be adverse to reading Alex Yaharo's next book. Okay, then, after that, I really need to pick this up because my camera battery's been blinking at me this entire recording session. After that, I read another book from my Twitter Picks My TBR, and also another book off my 20 books to read in 2020, and that was Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. Still don't know if it's Gillian or Gillian. Gillian. Gonna go with that. Okay, so so I knocked this off my 20 to read in 2020 and my Twitter Picks My TBR. I'm really excited and glad that I got this done. This was fine. It was 4 stars. What was crazy about this book is I spent the entire time reading it, because it's long. It's a chunky, okay. It's like 420 pages. So it's a decent size length, right? I spent the entire time thinking, surely we're going to get to a part of this book that has a scene that wasn't in the film. But we never did. Again, this is another one where the movie adaptation is literally scene for scene, and often line for line, accurate. And so, I gotta say, just go watch the movie. Because I don't really feel like there's a whole lot in this that adds to the story that you don't get in the movie, because I think the movie's really well done. I think Rosamund Pike is brilliant in it. I think she's so good. And Ben Affleck's not bad either, which no one's more shocked than me to hear me say that. Like, I think he's very Nick. So their performances are top notch. They convey so much in those performances. And I mean, I guess I think the only thing we get in this book, maybe more than in the film, is we get some of Nick's inconsistent internal thoughts, which I do suppose shape his character a little bit more than what we necessarily get. But otherwise, this is identical to the movie. But it's over 400 pages long. So, yeah, like, it's fine. I think I like the movie more, though, because I think it's more visually interesting than it is to necessarily read. And I think the performances are captivating enough that, because this doesn't add anything, and obviously this is the source material, I get that, okay? And, like, this is a great book. If I had read this on its own, maybe I would like it for, like, more than the movie. I don't know, though, because, like, I will say the film adds, like, one scene, not a scene that isn't referenced in this book. It's just a scene that she didn't give us, and that's Desi's death. They actually show us Desi's death, which is a real fucking shocker in the movie, but we slide right past it in the book. It's not shown in the book. So yeah, it's good. That being said, I don't think I really feel compelled to read anything else by Gillian Flynn. I've thought about it, but I'm kind of realizing that while I don't dislike thrillers, they're also not, like, my favorite thing in the world. So I probably won't be running out to pick up anything by her anytime soon. Yeah, I don't know. Terrible review. That's a terrible review. Really incoherent, but, like, it's fine. That's what I'm going to say. And then the last thing I finished this month was also from my Twitter Picks, my TBR, and that is So You Want to Be a Wizard by Diane Duane. This is a middle grade fantasy novel. It was published in the 80s. It's part of a series. I own at least, like, the first 5 or 6. And I've had this recommended to me by a bunch of people. Over the last 2 years, I've been reading a bunch, or trying to pick up a lot of older, like, 70s, 80s, 90s, middle grade fantasy kid series that I hadn't read as a kid, and just, you know, reading them for kind of posterity and my own personal education of the genre. And so yeah, this one has been recommended to me by multiple people, and I got cheap copies at work, so there you go. I gave this a 3.5 stars. I'm not gonna say this put me into a reading slump, but I did think, like, the font in this book, can we get to focus? The font is huge. So even though this is a 400-page book, it doesn't have that many words. It's only like a 67,000 word story. And it should have been really fast to read, but it took me about a week, which was a few days longer than I really wanted it to. And I was disturbed by a couple of things in this that I think are actually just more reflective of the privileged childhood I had than the fact that it's maybe not realistic. Like, the kids in the beginning of this book. So it's about a girl who's bullied at school, and she finds a book in the library that says, So You Want to Be a Wizard. And it talks about becoming a wizard as, like, part of a career. And she decides to become a wizard by taking the oath in the book and studying the book. She meets another kid. He also has recently found a book, and they fall into a whole heap and pile of shenanigans. The beginning of the book, though, there's a lot about the bullying and how violent, like, physically violent the bullying is. I really hate her dad. Like, hate him. I don't know if it's maybe an 80s thing. I'm losing my voice here. She's being, like, physically beaten up daily by these kids, and her dad's advice, and it's not like he's some, like, big tough guy. He's a fucking florist. But his advice, and he's, like, it's very clearly, like, conveyed by the character and kind of her interaction with her dad, that he's, like, kind of mad and disappointed at her for getting beat up. His advice is, why don't you fight them? terrible advice for a kid. And I don't know if that's maybe like an 80s thing, but like, holy crap, excuse me? What? You don't tell your like 13-year-old daughter to like fight people? You fucking get those kids like expelled or something. And like the kids who are beating her up are definitely like white kids. Maybe that's what the author's talking about. I don't know. There was just like a lot of violence between young children in this that I found kind of disturbing. Okay, we'll move on though, because that's probably just like my privileged lower middle class white girl coming out. Like, there was no violence at the schools I went to. And you would have been suspended if you did fight. So yeah, but I went to really, really tiny private schools. So I don't know. That aside, the story I think was good. The world building was really weird at the beginning because like it was like the book just kind of magically has all the answers in it, but also it doesn't really feel like anything's explained. It doesn't really necessarily feel like there are concrete rules in this world. It really kind of feels like just anything can happen if it's convenient to the plot. Not the biggest fan of that, but past that, the actual plot was like a lot of fun. The two kids have to go to, like, they accidentally like open this tear in space because then they're kind of like hiding. They're doing this spell. They attract some dark wizard's attention. They can't get away from him in the spell, so they like open a tear in space, and like a white nova comes through, and then the white nova is going to help them steal Nita's pen back from the bullies, but it swallows the pen, so then they have to go to this like world gate to try to get the pen out of the white nova, but then they end up traveling to another world controlled by a dark wizard. Like, it's wild. And all of that going forward is really great and really interesting. I do hope the sequels are good. I hope there's less like bullying and fist fighting and like punching and giving Nita black eyes. Like, I don't know about that part. I think altogether it was a more entertaining book than, say, I don't know, because like I think a lot of people who have recommended this to me have been comparing it to Harry Potter and how it's like really underappreciated and also better than Harry Potter. I can't say that for certain because I haven't read the other one. I need to read the sequels. This entire book though is definitely more interesting than like any part of the Harry Potter books that deals with Harry's obsession with Quidditch, though. I will 100% give it that. So yeah, we'll see. I'll continue reading these here and there. I'm not going to binge them or anything, but I'll pick one up now and again through the rest of the year, probably, and probably next year as well. Okay, so that's everything I've read. This wrap-up was really long, even though I only read 7 things. I'm currently reading Walk on Earth a Stranger by Ray Carson. Really, really enjoying this. I think this was a good time for me to read this too, because it is like 1860s Wild West, a hint of magic. Me and the boyfriend are currently watching like the 2nd season of Westworld, and also there's something about the setting and like the magic light, L-I-T-E, of this kind of reminds me of the 10,000 Doors of January. Also the kind of questionable family relations. Yes. So, if you like the 10,000 Doors of January, you might want to put this on your radar. Just see if it's like, read the summary or something on Goodreads. See if it's like something that kind of sounds interesting to you. Because I could see like some crossover interest between those two titles. Anyways, I'm currently reading this, not quite halfway through, but I'm going to read some more of it before I go to bed tonight. And yeah, that's everything I read in May. I'm gonna end this video because like I'm losing my voice. I've talked too much. Hopefully you found this interesting. Maybe you got a book rec, maybe not. This was one of those months where I read freaking all over the board. Like, I mean, I read hard sci-fi, literary fiction, a classic, a thriller, a middle grade fantasy, 2 YA fantasies, and a historical paranormal fantasy. So I guess we did skew towards SFF, sort of, barely, but this was a this was a bit of a mix of genres all the same. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure and hit that subscribe button if you want to be notified of any future videos. And I'll see you guys in my next video, which will hopefully be my June TBR. Looking forward to that, actually. I got some good plans for June. Bye.